Good afternoon. Welcome to ARTSPLACE. My name's Ted Lind. I'm a board member here and have had the opportunity, the pleasure to work with Brandt Eisner, our guest artist here today. Before we get started, this is the first time that we have live streamed a talk from here. Some people may be watching this from on YouTube, and so I'm going to say hi out there in TV land. Good to see you. But before we get started, to help us with our technology here, if you could turn off your phones, and also if you're connected to the Wi-Fi, if you could shut that down too, because it affects our reception here. So briefly, I want to mention we do have another exhibition. Once, sad to say, Brandt's show has to close at some point. But on June 3rd, we'll be opening another special exhibition in the main galleries downstairs, which we're looking forward to. An artist named Raquel Rowe from Ontario is coming here. She's originally from Barbados. It's a wonderful exhibition about the tension of assimilation, moving from one completely different culture to Canadian culture. So deals a lot with food culture, domestic activity, and so she'll be here on June 3rd. And just to give you a heads up, we're also having a special Caribbean-style dinner at the Garrison House Inn the night of that opening day. So we're really looking forward to that. And there's lots of other good things going on here. Just, there's a series of programs related to the Love of Lichens and Old Forest show downstairs. So we've got, lots going on. Just go on to our website and you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter that comes to your email. So anyway, Brandt Eisner, over the past 30 years, Brandt has dedicated much of his time to the art world. I can't believe 30 years, he looks too young. Having owned 2 galleries, graduated from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Interdisciplinary Arts, and worked in 2 other local galleries, curated many shows, and as well as growing his own art practice, busy person. So he's currently the curator of the Ice House Gallery in Tattagouche, and is co-creator of Eisner Fight Events Productions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brandt. Thank you, Brandt. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming, especially on a nice day. This is going to be really casual because I tend to rely heavily on audience participation, because I think questions really help drive the conversation, which my work is really about. So I'm going to sort of give a little blurb about who I am, and then we'll sort of go from there. So yeah, I'm Brandt. I want to start with, I always struggle with things like artist statements. I think it's really important for people to have their own experience with the work and bring their own history to it. So what I want to say is that you're not wrong in how you perceive or interpret the work. There really is no right or wrong answer, and my intention really is not to specifically drive the conversation, but be part of the conversation. And I think that's so important because, I talk to so many people who would never go to a gallery because they feel like they don't know enough, or, they're intimidated. They don't want to look like a fool. And so the constant education is just go and have your own. You don't have to feel like anything. You don't have to like anything. But maybe ask some questions like, why don't I like this? What's bringing up this, feeling? And I always encourage artists to do the same thing, because surprisingly, There's going to be a certain level of being stuck in your head and a certain perception. My work is, it's taken from my own experiences and from the experience of people I know or people within the community, the history of specifically the queer community. And because I grew up in a small town, there's definitely a lot of like, you know, what does that look like when you're growing up in the country? And compared to, you know, kids who are growing up in the city. There's definitely a, I think especially for city kids, because the conversation is very different and there's a conversation. I think they forget that, you know, in small towns, it's not that. Kids or adults are still dealing with the exact same issues that they did 20, 30 plus years ago. So it's not like we're all awake. And as we see the conversation that's going on, what's happening in the US, and you know, we're cycling back to, oh great, we need to fight for this again. You know, years ago, RuPaul was doing you know, was talking about not taking anything for granted, that it can change like that. All of our rights can be stripped like that. And we're seeing how that's happening. And so the work continues, and I kind of feel like, ironically, the work I'm doing now, or the work that I did 15 years ago, in some ways has become more relevant now than it was then. You know, when I was sort of asking, is this, you know, is this conversation that needs to keep happening? You know, have we talked this to death? And we haven't, and it's become super important. So I feel like, although my work stems from my experience, I like to say it really has nothing to do with me. It's more about the bigger picture. You know, I'm a grown-up and I can deal with my stuff. You know, I can go get therapy or go whatever, you know, I don't, it's not about me, it's not about necessarily like self-loathing, pity, you know, attention seeking on some level. And people have said, oh, you must be so angry, like your art is angry. And in some ways it is, but it's not anger for myself. It's anger for, you know, the kids especially, who are in the same situation that I grew up in, you know, 48 years ago. Like it's, not a lot has changed for a lot of people. So the frustration and anger is that we're still dealing with this, and how long are we going to have to continue the conversation about fitting in, being normal, acceptable. And so the work all takes from my own personal experiences, but I hope that it has a bigger reach than that. And what I really enjoy is that other people really inform the work on a deeper level. You know, today and at the opening, you know, people were sharing their interpretations, and it's so eye-opening to see how other people's stories relate in other ways, because we've all experienced sort of being the outsider at some point. It doesn't matter who you are. A bit about me, I guess. I grew up on the South Shore in Chester Basin, not Chester. Chester Basin's the poor part. It's like the real country. Into a very intense evangelical Baptist family and community. And it took me 24 years to sort of escape that. And it'll take sort of a lifetime of like understanding it all and knowing who am I now and how do I become maybe who I am fully. Because there's all that stuff that we're all born with and it's all dumped on us. And we then have to figure out what to do with that. And for some people, you know, it unfortunately leads down some pretty bad roads. And I feel very grateful that there was like the occasional person along the way that I could cling on to. And those relationships have changed over the years. You know, I had people who were my supporters and, you know, in some ways my family or, you know, therapist, which as I sort of grew and learned was suddenly not appropriate for the, like, they're like, okay, we can't do you anymore because now you are in conflict with our belief system or you're making us uncomfortable. And so it's a constant lifelong of finding your people, finding your family, and knowing that that's always going to change and that it's okay. It's the whole, you know, reason, season, lifetime situation of finding yourself. Growing up in a religious family, being the absolute weirdest one, yeah, is an interesting experience. You know, country family were, you know, woodworkers, forestry, the sports stars, and the leaders in the church. And I was like out of the womb gay. And the fact that everybody was in denial about that is quite extraordinary. But it was incredibly difficult. You know, I didn't come out till I was 24. But along the way, in many ways, I was constantly challenging the role that I was born into. And so not only are you the weird one, but then you're really the problematic one. Because, you know, I'm part of a family, a culture where you put on your drag for the public, you put on your drag for the church, and then what happens behind the closed doors can be completely different. So you're constantly living with the hypocrisy of that and questioning, you know, but why do? But those questions aren't okay to ask, to challenge the authoritarian dogma of the church or the belief system. So quite young, I became a huge problem. All those experiences, you know, at this stage, I'm so very grateful for. You know, it's the terrible things that really form us when we do the work to find ourselves. And if I didn't have all of that stuff, you know, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't have the relationships I have, and I wouldn't have the benefit of being able to have very real personal conversations with people that they may not necessarily be comfortable sharing with other people. So I get to be a part of a lot of people's story, and that's really refreshing and can be very affirming that, you know, it's a constant reminder I'm not in this alone. You know, there's a whole community out there that are experiencing the good, the bad, the ugly, and we can share that or be understanding of, or have a level of empathy for other people to understand that sometimes their actions are really rooted in what's been done to them. You know, my parents did the best they can with what they knew. And when I understood that, it suddenly became not personal. They were just doing what they knew, and it was nothing about me. And so as soon as you suddenly the anger sort of goes away, because you're like, oh yeah, they've had, you know, a shit life. They've, you know, they're reenacting all they knew, their trauma and their lack of feeling empowered or in control of their lives. I started making work when I was probably 15 or 16, and quickly ended up, people found me. I was just in my room, like making stuff and did not know what I was doing. I did not consider it art. I considered myself to be very much not creative, but I was just making stuff. And it was really an outlet to be able to discuss what I couldn't discuss. And when I look back at it, some of it was pretty intense. Like, I think some of what's downstairs is kind of intense. And I think some of that at 16 was like, you know, why did this not spark conversation? You know, this was pretty dark stuff. But again, it's that sense of denial. You know, oh, he's doing his thing, and that's fine. He's not getting into trouble. And it just, you know, there was one friend of the family who happened to be an artist, and they recognized what I was doing, and there was a ton of encouragement around, you need to keep doing this. Do you know that there's stuff in museums that, you know, other people did that's similar to this, Louise Nevelson, and, you know, I was like, oh, I don't know who any of those people are, but that's cool. But it was because of that, like, little sparks of support that there was something that was just like, I'm just going to do this. And so I started, you know, showing work at the Chester train station gallery, and started meeting other artists, and suddenly I'm curating shows when I'm 17. And it was the thing that made me acceptable in some ways, although not always, but it was like, okay, he's got this thing now, whereas there was very much no expectations that I would amount to anything. You know, it was just like, hopefully he won't end up in a gutter. So it was like, there was this thing that at least people felt, my parents especially felt like, okay, there's a glimmer of hope here, that there's something he can do and wants to do. And it just grew from there. I went to NASCAD as a mature student. After, you know, showing work in a gallery, owning a gallery, and it was exactly what I needed to direct myself. I felt like I had learned as much as I could on my own. What do I want to say about the show? I probably started working on this about 5 years ago, and all of my work has threads. Although I kind of work with different themes and have different bodies of work that deal with different topics, the threads of conversation are very similar. There's the queerness, there's a lot about gender, masculinity, what that means, and just, you know, being the outsider and negotiating that. And a lot of it's just like, you know, it's conversations within myself that I'm trying to figure out. And that's just how I figure it out. Sometimes just words just, you know, you don't have the words. And so it comes out visually. And the bonus is that people seem to really react to that. And for me, the work is only done once somebody's engaged with it. And it could be one person, or it could be, you know, however many people. But as soon as that happens, the work is finished. And my job's done. I'm often asked, like, where do all these ideas come from? And the answer is always, I don't know. Because the reality is, I don't know. I think as artists, I don't know if we can take credit for the ideas. The ideas come from somewheres. You know, if you want to talk about religion or spirituality, like, we don't know where those things come from, but they show up. And our only job, or my only job, is to do the work and bring it to physicality. So I feel like that's my job. I didn't ask for it, but I enjoy it. It keeps me sane. And if a piece was never shown, I would still be doing work. You can't help it. And to me, that's like what an artist is. You just have no control over the fact that you're going to create in some ways constantly, whether it's in your head or physically. I'd say 90% of my studio work is in my head. I'm constantly processing so that when it comes time to sit down and do it, it's already pretty much figured out. There's no guesswork. I'm not like normally fumbling my way or figuring it out as I go. It's usually it's just there. It just needs to be brought to life. Talking about religion is always a tough one. It's incredibly emotional for people. It challenges their identity. And my feeling is that if you can't ask questions, then probably your religion is incredibly problematic. If you can't question things, if you can't go, what about the history of? Me and my parents can't talk about religion. We have a great relationship, but we don't talk about religion because it can go to a really bad place. But one of the things in some of those conversations is, you know, how are you accountable for your belief system? How do you legitimize a history that's based in violence? And it's hard for people to think that way. You know, it's often like, but I'm part of a church and, you know, this is what we do and it's all about love and that's great. But have you examined the history of where this belief system came from? And usually it has not. And I've said to my parents, it's okay for you to believe this is your life, if you're comfortable taking responsibility for, and this is harsh, but millions of deaths. Are you okay and can admit that what you're practicing right now is killing people? That's something that people do not want to hear. But the reality is that whether it's directly somebody being beaten to death in the street because of their queerness, or whether they are committing suicide because they've been told their whole life how wrong they are, it's all murder. It's all been done to somebody based on a belief system. Not all religions are the same, obviously. And there's changes definitely going on. We have, you know, churches who are very accepting and promoting their acceptance of everybody, but there's still a lot of harm being done. And when you see that firsthand on a regular basis, it can be pretty soul-crushing. And so this body of work, and most of what I do, is just asking people to take a minute and think about, where has my belief system, even outside of religion, has come from? Why do I believe these things that I do around sexuality or, you know, roles, female, male roles, little subtle things. When we think about where did that come from, this little glimmer of this is normal and this is not normal. it's ingrained in all of us. We're kind of a nation built on, a lot of Protestants that escaped religious persecution. My family from Germany, escaped here. And the ironic thing is that they came here to escape it and then inflicted it on others. I think I want you guys to sort of ask some questions to sort of like feed the conversation. So yeah, please ask away, and then we'll go from there. I do have images of, well, the work in the show downstairs in case we want to refer to anything. And I also have images of past work. And I just have those on hand in case they feel relevant, or if somebody's asking about, the connection between, what I was maybe doing when I was in my teens and how that connects to now. So throw something at me. Yes?
There's an image in the show of, I think it's Mary and Jesus with an alien.
Yes.
I grew up queer in a family where I actually thought I was an alien. I just wondered if you
Yeah.
identified similarly, maybe say something about that.
Yeah, and I didn't really have words for that. And a couple of years ago, I was asked to give a talk and just, basically, just my story. And I didn't know how, I was terrified. I didn't know even where to start. And I realized that, the first line of my thing was like, what you don't know is that I'm an alien. Because it's like this family didn't make sense, this community didn't make sense. I didn't understand why I was put there in this place and this time. Yeah, just constantly feeling like something is so wrong here that I did not understand. And I would say that was just there from very, very young. I remember, from very young age, have always, whether it was suicide attempts or, there was just this firm notion that something was wrong and I was in the wrong place and the wrong time and I couldn't understand why. So it just, yeah, I was like, why? Why? This family.
Does it make sense now?
Now it makes sense, yeah. And I think that's just because
You're lucky.
I'm lucky.
You're out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was so many times that I could easily have fallen into, drug addiction, alcoholism, or just, so many times that I could have offed myself so easily. And it was other people, usually, that, you kind of have to, okay, this might not, this is another form of being selfish. Yes?
Well, I just want to say you're a true survivor,
Oh,
for real, of course. And my favorite piece is, I forgot, I think it might be called Transfiguration. The portrait, I think yourself,
yeah,
in grade school probably.
Yep.
And then the drag yourself as Jesus.
yeah.
I totally love that piece. My very favorite.
I think,
I think
that,
it says so much about your journey.
yeah,
Condensed in one image from there all the way to this kind of pinnacle of beauty and acceptance. And also sort of the origin of your pain.
yeah.
I love that piece.
Yeah, it speaks to, the process, and I'll never be there, I'll never, but I feel like the important part is being on the path, and just being self-aware. I tend to overanalyze everything. So I'm always in my head, always trying to figure things out. It's exhausting. But without that, I wouldn't have gotten to, that place of being able to be like, okay, I can see this person, this version, I can see that version of myself that still exists. and then I can see the other side of that, where I'm at a certain stage, hopefully moving towards continued growth. But it's like both of those lives are still like, they're so connected. You are always living with scars that are unseen. And people who are not able to have the conversation or to be able to look at what they've come out of, asking themselves, what does it all mean, I guess? How did I participate? And how do I take responsibility for my own healing? No one's going to do that for me. And I come from a generation where, the fight was to break down the boundaries, the barriers, the differences. And we're in such a different time. It's really interesting because people very much want to be, they want the label. And those labels vary for all of us. Some people want to be the victim. It's a comfortable place to sit. It's hard to do the work. It would be very comfortable for me to, see myself as, I don't know, the curator accomplishments. Like, it's a weird thing. One of the things that you grow up with in religion is that, you're born evil. And so you're born wrong right from the beginning. And that is reinforced. And so it's very hard to accept that maybe it's a compliment or that that you have grown in some ways, because you still see and very focused on the wrong.
Well, I love that piece. It's a distillation in my mind.
Thank you.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun to do. I am a drag performer, which I didn't throw out there, so it's very much, drag is very much a part of my life. And very much, I only realized the last few years that drag is part of my art practice. To me, it was just this thing, this fun thing that I did. And I usually tend to use social, political, themes, or try to bring an aspect of maybe challenging or maybe people just, uncomfortable, mixed with, having a laugh. And that's kind of what drag is. It's like, it gives you an opportunity to make little pokes and say, question this, question this, question this. What does gender mean? Who am I? What's the construct I've created? What drag am I wearing in my everyday life? What am I hiding and pretending to be? How am I acting? So drag has become a pretty critical aspect, which I did not expect. And so it's been kind of cool to bring it into the gallery and out of the bar. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that, first of all, your empathy for your family is incredible. How you think, you understand where your parents are at. I think that's commendable but difficult. I had a similar situation, but mostly dealt with politics and not religion.
Mm-hmm.
So, but right now, religion and politics are so closely connected now.
Yeah.
Can you just
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's kind of ironic. I was, listening to something, and they were talking about how social political issues and how they're based in, sort of religious teaching. So whether it's abortion or, same-sex marriage or whatever it is. And yet the people who are using this dogma have no connection to religion or church. And it's so bizarre that this is their foundation when it's not even something they believe, but this little piece fits their agenda. And really, that's what, when you look at Christianity, that's what it is. I was going to do a count and I forgot. There's this huge list of parts of the Bible that have been completely discarded. Huge amounts. They're still finding more that contradict, right? The stories don't line up. But man was able to go in there and sort of do this wonderful picking and choosing to create this agenda. And we're still following the agenda without understanding that there's other versions of this. And they all share a root. And the root isn't bad. Most major religions all share the same kind of philosophies. And it's just the little minute differences that we fight over. The church I grew up in was part of the Chester Baptist Church. And there was a disagreement about something stupid. And so the church split and created another church. Well, a number of years later, I have no idea how long, there was another disagreement around convention. The church split again. All along, these little tiny things destroying friendships, families, all for the idea that we're doing the right thing. And I think that's kind of the narrative, is that we're doing the right thing and the damage done on the periphery is okay. And so we can invade a nation, and we can do that because we've been given permission. We have God's blessing. We can eliminate people because we have examples of it, and so there's God's will that we go in and we have to save these people. So we have to dismantle everything that they know. And we still continue to do that, whether it's within our own little circles of discarding people because they don't fit the little box that we need them to be in to feel comfortable with ourselves. My parents can't be challenged. Their entire identity is based in religion. If for whatever reason they were to abandon that, they wouldn't know who they are. They wouldn't know how to be. When you have had a difficult life and you're able to believe that there's a reward at the end and that you just have to get there, that you're living your life for death. It's an apocalyptic cult of we just can't wait to get there. Meanwhile, we're not really living our lives or learning or growing, or it's all about getting there. If I were to take that away from my parents, they don't have hope that they can do it on their own. And they need to feel like there's something better. So I don't want to take that from them anymore. they need that, they can have that. Just keep it to yourselves.
Christmas dinner.
I could see you giving this presentation, this talk, from the pulpit. I can see you doing that. And maybe turning some minds, but finding that as a place to be.
Yeah, and I think, I was thinking on the way here, I'm like, there's so many forms of dogma. Like, you can take anything that becomes extreme or like, this is the only way. My husband's Hindu, which is a very broad, like, explore, figure it out. There's no right or wrong. You're on your own journey. But there's still aspects of that that are incredibly dogmatic. Anything can become extreme. And again, it's a way to I think it's all based in mental health.
Right.
When you need something to reaffirm your pain or your situation, rather than maybe finding ways to deal with that pain, it's an easy go-to. If you surround yourself with a community, you suddenly don't feel alone. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with spirituality. But what happens when we take things to the extreme? I know atheists that are dogmatic. Politicians, like anything can become a dangerous way of thinking when you don't leave space for other people's experiences, alternate histories, learning, growth, taking care of your mental health. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, people need to do what they need to do. I just think it's unfortunate that people are not able to see that they have the power themselves to make the changes, to be what they want to be, to find their community without living with a sense of guilt, shame, fear. Because with what I grew up in, that's all it is. And that sticks. It sticks. It sticks. You've been brainwashed to believe that you are not enough without this unseen thing.
How long did it take you to get to the point where you could have that insight about your parents needing that, their way of life, and you're feeling like no longer any need to sort of adjust them out of it?
It's definitely been a process.
Yeah.
But when I first, it was actually, I grew up watching Oprah. Yeah. And she had a guest that, pointed out the whole, people do the best they can with what they know. And it resonated with me so intensely that within almost that moment, it changed my whole thought process. And I let go of the blame.
How old would you have been roughly about that time?
17, 18 maybe?
Whoa.
You were lucky to have that happen.
Yeah, it's still a challenge. I still wish for my parents to have a greater experience. Like so many people who grow up in the country, they never leave. They've never experienced the world. They've never experienced other points of view or cultures. The only experience they've had is growing up in a small community, in an incredibly dysfunctional family, and within a dogmatic church, where they have to perform for everybody. So yeah, I don't know. It's I'm happy that I came to sort of some of those realizations and that there were resources for me to, continually work on myself and how to participate in this world in a way that I'm comfortable in, and I'm rarely comfortable. The voices are there all the time. All the time.
In terms of where you are now, are there any positives that you're able to take away from that church experience?
Totally. I think that's the thing, and that's where it becomes so complicated, is that you've gotten things that kind of, alcohol was such a no-no. It was not wine at communion, it was grape juice. So I never had a sip of drink until I was in my mid-20s. And there was no interest. And for me, that was a saving grace, because it could have been incredibly problematic. And my friends drank and my friends smoked, and I never engaged in it. And it wasn't even a guilt-based thing. It was more of this doesn't make sense to me. Definitely if my parents found out played a role in that too. But it sort of stuck with me, as I, got older and older, that, realizing what has served me to this point, what principles have helped me. And some of them are very basic. It's the whole love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others. It's, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It's getting to a point where you understand that what you do not only impacts others, but in some way there's going to be consequences. And I don't mean negative consequences, but I mean that you're going to have to negotiate with yourself why you maybe behave or are the way you are. I don't think that happens for everyone. Dad will always live in his little bubble where it's his own little world and he can't see outside of that world.
Again, it comes back to questioning the Bible, right? If
Yeah.
they're unwilling to question that belief system, then I think they're much more unwilling to question themselves and their actions, right?
Yeah.
Because it's how they
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, it's easily justifiable. There's always examples of why certain behavior is okay. Without the people love Leviticus, they love to pull the gay card out of Leviticus, and yet they completely ignore the myriad of other things in the same context. That, if you wear polyester, you're going to hell. It's shelf it. It's so easy to leave out what's convenient. And hold on, just cling on to that one little nugget. Even when a few books later it might contradict itself. The heroes, the biblical heroes, we're only sort of taught one side of that. We hear about all the great things that David did. Well, we're not told about all of his wives and concubines and wiping out complete cities because God told them to. Like, there's so much that just doesn't add up. But people need to be able to, me screaming about it isn't going to change anybody's mind. Like, me fighting with my parents is not going to change anything. It's just going to harden them even more. And so it really does come down to just partly living by example and partly they have all these conflicting ideas about being gay, but they love my husband, adore him. But, they don't know how to negotiate the fact that maybe our son's going to hell. And we don't want that for him. We want to be in heaven with him.
That won't heaven be perfect anyway. They won't miss you.
If that happens, I think they're going to be having their own good time. I don't think it's going to be about us hanging out.
They're not there miserable, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of heaven.
Yeah. And I don't understand people's need for what's on the other side.
There's also this need for everybody to be the same,
Yeah.
which makes me nuts.
Yeah.
It's like, really? We're
Yeah.
not all the same.
We're not, but it's such a comfortable feeling to think that we're all the same. And when we're not, it's bad. It's just so comforting to think that I'm part of this big community of sameness.
So where are you personally now in relationship to your Christian religion and the patriarchy?
Conflicted.
Incarnation.
Yeah. It's a challenge. I mean, there's a reason why queer men struggle with relationships with straight men. And are so more comfortable with women and just connect so quickly. And partly it's a common experience, right? We've watched our mothers be, treated a certain way, expected to behave a certain way, and often see that that's not really who they are. And not necessarily what they really want, but they have to fill a role. Meanwhile, us as queer kids, we're kind of doing the exact same thing. We're trying to fulfill a role. And I was so aware of the lives that the women around me could have had. And that might be a little negative, but my mother would have loved to explore the world, and to get outside of herself. And she never had the opportunity to do that. And I could only do so much and take on so much of that responsibility. So it's super challenging. It's living in a hyper-masculine world is not fun. It's yeah. It's not. I started at a really young age, like I said, with art and sort of finding myself. And it was always a battle against the men. Always. The women always accepted. It's very comfortable for a woman to be around a gay man. They don't have to deal with most of the bullshit of, there's a connection there. And especially a connection to strong women. They kind of embody the strength that we want to have. So, there's we're obsessed with our divas. There's a reason these strong women are living their lives. in a way that's unapologetic, really. At least that's how we perceive them. I mean, they're dealing with all their stuff and the behind the scenes and, still a male world. But we still see them as being like these rebels who've taken on society and are living their best lives. I don't know. That's a tough question. I guess the only answer is it's hard. But I think it's hard for everybody, whether they want to admit it or not. Dad may have been the sports star, but he squashed down his vulnerable side or the fact that he loved gardening. That was not okay. So everyone misses out in many ways. Yeah.
Your work is very unapologetic in the fact that you get up to the Bibles and guns. And to me, it seems very obvious what you're saying. And I'm just curious when you get people, maybe they don't come to your show, but I'm thinking like my parents or your parents who come from a very religious background, extremely conservative, how they react to your work. Do they leave? Do they get angry?
And I don't get to know that in many cases. I'm not here to experience it. I don't see it. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the first time I showed a version of this was at the Marigold Center in Truro. Truro is a very religious community, even still. And, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to have to deal with after this. I don't know. As it is, I'm already an outsider. Didn't grow up in Truro. And, an artist friend came to me at the opening and was like, do you think this is going to get shut down? And I was like, that would be amazing. Please, somebody shut it down. I will be all over the news. I will be known. But the response was overwhelmingly positive. And even from people that I knew who are religious, but are trying to find a new way, and are very aware of the hypocrisy and how we treat people. There was only one bad comment in the guest book, and it was a comparison, more so, of, if this show, something to the effect, if this was the same show but it used the Quran, you couldn't get away with it. And my response was, unfortunately, I couldn't have the conversation with that person because it would have been awesome. But I don't want to have a conversation about that.
It hasn't impacted you.
I don't have that experience. It's not my right to talk about it. I've usually used obviously male figures in my work. And somebody was like, oh, it's too bad you don't have, women up there and, the lesbian community. And I'm like, I don't know that experience. There may be similarities, but I'm not going to claim I know what it's like to be a lesbian and to grow up and deal with all those issues. So, for me, any artist, if you're not talking from your own sort of experience or understanding, you're kind of doing a disservice. And it's the same with politics and social politics. When are we getting in the way by speaking for somebody? When do we start being another version of the white savior under the guise of I'm doing good? I need to do this for another community, while undercutting the voice. My husband's Indian, immigrated here, is constantly infuriated by white people speaking for him. Constantly. Because they get it wrong most of the time. Thinking they're doing the right thing. And to me, that sounds an awful lot like religion. I understand you think you're doing the right thing, but sometimes you need to take a back seat and let other people drive. And by stepping in and trying to do it for people is saying you can't do it yourself. People can do it themselves. They might need support. they might need somebody to stand there with them. But I don't need other people speaking for me. A few years ago with Pride, there was this big scandal. A friend of mine who's a drag performer was one of the, many, many people on the poster, or like in all the promotion. And he was wearing a face kini. And a face kini is basically, it covers your entire face except for your eyes. It goes back to drag, early drag, Lee Bowery. And this was a black skin kini with like rhinestones and stuff all over it. And a straight white person, university professor, went berserk about this being blackface. Unfortunately, Pride did everything it could do to apologize and remove that image from all the because there wasn't room for a conversation around, first of all, this is not blackface. Second of all, you're completely ignoring queer history, the queer story, the queer narrative of saying, I'm not this. This body is not me. I'm just this like sack of skin walking around. The me is something else. It's something else in there. And I just happen to have this thing that I have to deal with. And how other people engage with me because of this rather than who I am. So it's that thing, when you get to know somebody, it's a lot harder to judge who they are. Once my parents got to know Chris, it becomes very hard to demonize because there's a face, there's a person there. And I think that's, whatever form of discrimination, there's this fear-based, the fear of the other and what that might mean. But when you get to know the other, it's a lot harder to be so angry.
Being a queer artist in the Nova Scotia art community, how was that for you?
That's a good question. Jeez.
Sorry.
I don't know if I've ever thought about it. I just feel like I do what I do without necessarily needing approval. And what's interesting is the majority of the people who engage with my work are straight. I find that for many, many years, most of my peers never came to a show that I did not engage with me as an artist. I was still the weird one, right? I mean, there's this thing is, you finally are going to come out and be part of a community. That's what I was told. I'm going to be part of this family. But then you find out, wait a minute, you don't fit in there either. You're not right for them. You're too femme, you're too weird, you dress too, suddenly you're like, oh my goodness, I also don't fit in these roles. And I never understood that. I was like, where's this family I'm supposed to have? All the people who understand me. And I felt like more of an outsider in some ways. I knew how to fit into the straight community. I'd been faking that for 24 years. But suddenly I had another community that I was supposed to be part of, and I didn't feel like I was accepted by it. And I think it's only kind of recently that I realized, we're all damaged boys. And we all deal with that damage in different ways. And when you're raised in a hyper, masculine world as a gay person, there's still these roles that you can easily fall into in order to feel safe. Yeah. Anything else?
I would say in the arts community that there is no there to a very large extent because there's so many different disciplines. But if there is a there, you are one of the leaders in this province of the arts community and highly respected and much appreciated.
Well, thank you. That's always weird to hear. I feel very grateful and honored that I get to do what I do. I really, I am humbled constantly by the fact that I get to do what I really enjoy and people really appreciate it, and are grateful in ways where I just feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. When you've spent so long being like, why am I here? Like, what is the point of me existing in this moment? And, ideally there shouldn't be a reason. We should just be existing because it's great to exist, or, we're enough. But for me, it's like, I feel like, I was kind of given a job to do. And so as long as I'm doing that job, I feel okay. So I'm grateful to the people who let me do the job. Yeah. All done? I'm going to be hanging out, so if anybody wants to talk more one-on-one, especially about any specific pieces, by all means. I'm going to be here for a bit. Thank you.
And the show's up till May 27th.
Yes. Yeah.